Well, after a shaky start, we're off to the August meeting of the Corangamite Shire. I'd like to welcome everyone here. We'll start with the prayer. You'll have to bear with us because we're trying out new technology tonight. We'll start with the prayer. We ask for our guidance and blessing on this council. May the true needs and well-being of our communities be our concern.
Yeah, I can hear it. Yeah.
Help us who serve as leaders to remember that our decisions are made in the best interests of the people, culture and environment of the Corangamite Shire. Amen. We'll now have the acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. I'll welcome all the councillors. We'll move around the board. First, Helen Durant, Councillor Helen Durant, Councillor Leslie Brown, Councillor Joe Beard, Councillor Geraldine Kennedy, Councillor Ruth Gistrain, Councillor Simon Illingworth, and myself, Mayor Neil Trotter. We'll start with apologies. Do we have any apologies, Mr. Mason?
Mr. Mayor, we've got no apologies for tonight's meeting.
And do we have any declarations of conflict of interest?
Mr. Mayor, I've got one declaration of conflict of interest from Councillor Gistrain in relation to item 9.6.
Thank you. We'll move on to confirmation of minutes. Councillors, can I have someone confirm the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you. Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Gistrain. Councillor, any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous decision. We'll move on to deputations and presentations. Mr. Mason, do we have any deputations or presentations?
None for tonight's meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Move on to committee reports. Item 7.1, Audit and Risk Committee, Establishment and Charter. Mr. Ray, thank you.
Mayor, thank you, and through you. Councillors, the 2020 Local Government Act places an obligation on the council to establish a new Audit and Risk Committee and to also adopt an Audit and Risk Committee charter to give effect to the functions and responsibilities described in the Act. The 2020 legislation introduces new requirements for council in respect to Audit and Risk Committees. Council's current Audit Committee largely operates in accordance with these requirements, and the changes to be implemented are negligible. The charter proposed for adoption is based on the Local Government Victoria model, which has been developed in consultation with the sector. In comparison to the existing charter, the changes are minimal in that the committee is obligated to have a greater oversight of legislative compliance. And council has been previously briefed on this change. The recommendation also proposes council reappoint existing members to the new committee for the remainder of their terms. Mayor, in establishing the new committee, it's recommended to dissolve the committee enacted under the former 1989 Act and to revoke the charter adopted in January of this year. Mayor, the recommendation is before council.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Councillors, recommendation is before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Durant. We'll have a seconder. Councillor Brown. Councillor Durant. You're on mute, Councillor Durant.
Sorry about that. As Mr. Ray has said, Council's Audit Committee Charter already complies with many of the requirements of the new Audit and Risk Committee, with only a few minor changes to the charter needed. It makes sense that the Audit and Risk Committee become responsible for the appointment of their chairperson, as they are in a much better position to judge who would be the best candidate rather than the final decision being made by the whole council. The responsibility for monitoring compliance with legislation and regulation is a new requirement, and details as to the extent of this are still unknown. We need to monitor those areas of greatest risk to the organisation rather than take a blanket approach, which could add an increased and unnecessary administrative burden to the committee. I'm very happy to move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lorraine. Councillor Brown? You're on mute, Councillor Brown. Right. No, you're still on mute. You're right now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, nothing further, Councillor Durrance.
Thank you. Councillors, any further comment? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 7.2, transition of special committees and committees of council policy review. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. This report and in fact the following 3 reports have been prepared to ensure that council is compliant with the new Local Government Act. Under the Act, existing committees can no longer exist in that legal framework, so it's therefore necessary to transition the existing committees into either asset committees or delegated committees. Our approach at Corangamite has been to do it as light touch as possible, thereby just transferring effectively existing committees across to the new structure with as little change as possible. So it's recommended in quite a lengthy recommendation before councillors that you revoke the existing policy and committees and adopt a new policy and reappoint existing committee members to the new asset committees. So the recommendation is before you.
Thanks, Mr. Mason. Councillors, can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Beard, second Councillor Canady. Councillor Beard.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, as Mr. CEO highlighted, that this is all in relation to the implementation of the Local Government Act, and very much procedural, but it does actually again highlight the amazing amount of people, volunteers that we have that help us do what we need to do within our communities and on behalf of council a lot of the time. So it just reiterates how important they are. Obviously, there's a lot more accountability. I think we notice that as a whole flavour through the new Local Government Act, and it's not only on us as councillors, but also our community members that volunteer on our behalf. So it's good to see that there's obviously referencing to how in which our committees are to adhere to either terms of reference or codes of conduct. But it's a good and timely reminder of just how integral these people are to the operations of not only, as I said, the Shire, but also for our community assets. So we're very lucky to have them, and technically just some word changes and a little bit of tidying up, but it's great, as I said, once again, to be able to highlight these people.
Councillor Beard. Councillor Canady. Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Canady. Right.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's very little I could add to what Councillor Beard has just said. She's covered it very well. I support the recommendations as they've been put forward, and I think that we've taken the right approach in the way that the special committees have been transitioned. So I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Canady. Any further comment, councillors? Yeah, I'd just like to add, when I was reading through this, I noticed that it's probably a procedural matter, but I noticed that there are 186 community members serving on these committees. So there's a number of various committees, and hopefully they'll all choose to remain on the committees. And I'd especially like to thank them there for their ongoing commitment to the committees. It makes our job so much easier. So without any further ado, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to There's no planning reports this month, so we'll move on to officers' report, item number 9 and 9.1, governance rules. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. This report, again, is a requirement of the new Local Government Act. It recommends that Council adopt new governance rules. The governance rules effectively replace the meeting procedure, local law and Council's caretaker policy. And so the recommendation is obviously before you there, but there's the revoking of the policy and all the two policies there before you, and adoption of the new governance rules.
Thanks, Mr. Mason. Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Durant, seconded Councillor Gastrane. Councillor Durant.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. These governance rules define how we go about our business, conduct ourselves and our meetings, make decisions and represent the community. Importantly, these rules also incorporate the previously separate public participation at council meetings policy that details how members of the public can speak at a council meeting through making a deputation or presentation or through an open forum. They also now reflect the reality of holding meetings online and live streaming the proceedings. And I'm very happy to move the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Durant. Councillor Gastrane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just back what Councillor Durant has said with regards to this policy. A lot of the information taken, particularly around the meeting procedures, has come from our local law number 3, which will stay in force as it does have penalties attached to it. It's also interesting to note that this has been publicly advertised. The governance rules were publicly advertised for comment, and we only received one comment around that, which has been circulated to councillors. So I'm happy to second the recommendation, second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Gastrane. Councillors, any further comment? Councillor Illingworth.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just briefly, I'd like to make a mention of Penny, our governance officer, who's done a terrific job. It hasn't been easy. There's been some subtle changes, but also there's been a number of dates that things had to be in, and I'd just like to make a mention of her work and what a terrific job she's done.
Thanks, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor, any further comment? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.2, public transparency policy. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Again, the new Local Government Act requires that Council has a public transparency policy. This sets a policy framework for the very important principles of making sure that as much of Council's business as possible can be is available to the public, and that we are transparent in our workings and dealings. The policy effectively codifies existing practices and particularly about what information is available to the public. So the recommendation is that Council adopt a new policy.
Thanks, Mr. Mason. Councillors, can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Gastrane, seconded Councillor Canady. Councillor Gastrane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think transparency goes along under good governance, and this council certainly has conducted itself with a great deal of transparency in the past and will in the future. According to this policy, it's quite a significant amount of information is available to the public without having to go through FOI applications. So that's really important, and it's also good to know that this council conducts its business as publicly as possible, as Mr. Mason said, and we have a very low percentage of business that is conducted as confidential items, which I think is a really good thing, being as open and transparent as we can be with the public as possible. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Strain. Councillor Canady. Oh, you're on mute still, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Mayor, and I do support the comments of Councillor Strain. Yes, the update is consistent with the requirements of the Local Government Act 2020, I'll also add that I've noted that the 5 principles under which the council must operate are highly valued at Corangamite, and the ethics of transparency, accountability and integrity are well embedded. So I'm proud to have that's the case here at Corangamite. The policy enshrines these standards according to Section 57 of the Local Government Act 2020, and I support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Canady. Councillors, any further? Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Best disinfectant is sunlight, and I think that is something that all local governments should aspire to be open and honest and transparent to the community.
Thank you. Councillors, any further comment? Yeah, I'd just like to add, I've got no objections to this policy and support the recommendation, but I only hope that our state and federal legislative bodies are subject to the same principles and practice that they preach. You know, with the new Act, they're ensuring that we have to jump through hoops regarding transparency and accountability, etc. And I would just hope that it works its way up as we go on. So with any further business, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.4, 9.3, Council Expenditures Policy. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Thank you. This report recommends that Council adopt a new councillor expenses policy. Council obviously has an existing councillor expenses policy that codifies what entitlements councillors can have. And this recommendation is that the existing policy be revoked and replaced with a new one, which has very minimal changes. So Councillor Corangamite Shire was already operating in accordance with most of the all of the recommendations of the existing Act. So recommendations before you.
Thanks, Mr. Mason. Councillors, recommendations before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Beard, do we have a seconder? Councillor Gustane. Councillor Beard.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Mayor, and it's quite interesting this one follows up the transparency policy, obviously, and it's something that Corangamite Shire have always been open about is the expenses, the fact that we've had an expenses policy all along. And as our CEO, Mr. Mason, alluded to, the fact that there's minimal changes, and it once again just goes to show to our community who have elected us as to what we're actually claiming for, and to make sure that obviously there's rules and regulations around those claims and that it's very open and transparent. So I have no problems at all in moving that recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Beard. Councillor Gustane.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree. It's important that we have a policy, and it's been in place for a number of years. I think it's worth mentioning that apart from the usual things that you'd expect to be reimbursed for with travelling and your communication expenses, I think it's also worthwhile to note and inform the public that there is an ability to claim carer expenses, whether it's for a counsellor who perhaps has children that need caring for so they can carry out the counsellor duties, or an aged relative or family member. So I think that's just something that perhaps a lot of people don't think is available, and it is through the expenses policy. So I'm happy to second that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Gustane. Councillors, any further comment? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I'm having trouble with that word again. We'll move on to item 9.4, Sync Youth Strategy 2020-2025. Mr. Ray, thank you.
Mayor, thank you. Through you, this report presents Council's first youth strategy for adoption titled Sync. It's a 5-year strategy, as you've just described, encompassing the period 2020 to 2025. The strategy is a combination of views and aspirations of over 250 young people across Corangamite and stakeholders. The strategy has been prepared in consultation with the Corangamite Shire Youth Council and Freezer Youth Crew. The premise behind the strategy is largely to give voice to younger members of our community and to address the issues the consultation has identified during the strategy's development. It's not intended, this strategy, to be prescriptive in nature, but largely it's a roadmap to work in partnership with the young people of our community. Importantly, the strategy will also be supported by an annual action plan and regular reporting to Council. Mayor, the recommendation is before you to adopt the strategy this evening, and to also recognise the good work undertaken by the youth of our community in developing that strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Beard, do we have a seconder? Councillor Canady. Councillor Beard.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it was a given that I was nearly going to raise my arm up first then with my passion, particularly around this project. Firstly, I'd like to thank the author of this report, Katie Hearn, who is the Manager of Community Services, for pulling this report together for us. Obviously, normally we've had our managers be with us on these nights, but thank you to Director Ray for introducing this one. Obviously, the exciting part about this is it's our first ever youth strategy, and it was our way, Council's commitment through the last budget process last year around, are we providing and doing the right things by the youth within our shire, and can we do better? So that's how the strategy came about, and it's something that obviously I've been extremely passionate about. And also other decisions that we make on behalf of our communities for the whole of community. So I guess there was a lot of questions that we had been previously asking ourselves. Interestingly enough, we've got over 2,500 youth, we call them youth, that actually live here in Corangamite Shire, which is a fair portion of what we usually refer to as an ageing population. So that's an acknowledgement in itself that we've got that many young people living across our shire. The interesting part about that is that 50% of those younger people live rurally. So it's very broad in terms of the services and the needs that they actually require. The strategy is actually titled SYNC, which is really relevant because it means people moving together. And I think going forward, we've identified, and particularly our youth services team, is that if we're going to do anything by our youth, we all need to be doing it together. The engagement process attracted 253 local young people plus various other stakeholders. And the average age of those youth that were actually engaged was, interestingly enough, 16. So that was a really good age that we're able to capture. Obviously, COVID hit and it made the whole engagement process completely different, and we had to go into a space of engaging with our communities in a way that we never had before. I guess if anyone was going to adapt to this, it's obviously our younger people that do the best job in that way. But the credit to our team is they went direct targeting. They went to online surveys, Zoom meetings, and many conference calls. The results have taught us so much about our youth. We have learned how they communicate, which interestingly enough, 52% of those respondents actually want ways to meet new friends. So obviously online isn't the be all and end all. So it doesn't mean that online is a way that everyone interacts. Do they even know where they access their services? That was something else that we got to learn about. Even the fact that 25% just want to have a say about future decisions. Comments were, interestingly enough, too, one of the comments was, or probably a few of the comments were even that we needed to fix the roads properly. So that's quite consistent with what the older people in our community have to say back to us as well. Favourite for me was the want of workshops around life skills and wanting to learn about life skills. Obviously, we put a lot of impetus, a lot of pressure on our education system to provide so much these days, but there's only so much they can do, and life skills often come from the home, which a lot of younger people actually don't get those skills now because for whatever reason it may be that they don't have that support at home. So I thought that was a really good comment from them, that they actually were wanting workshops about gaining that sort of skill, and it is something that we can actually provide them with. The challenges that they're facing, 50% actually said that they want something to do on the weekends. Traditionally, we think all our local kids play sport on weekends, but obviously that's not the case. So that's something really valuable knowing. 34% want stable and enjoyable work, 31% want enjoyable hobbies, and 36% want to see more mental health supports available. I think that's really important as we lead into the production of our next health and wellbeing plan for the next council, that we're aware of particularly that as an issue for the younger people, because often we've only ever, I guess, focused on the older people in our communities and what we need to do for them. So I think that's a really critical learning. Our focus, particularly for this strategy, is going forward is for the age group 12 to 20. The youth is actually technically 12 to 25, but we can't service everybody, of course, so we're trying to hone in on that 12 to 20-year-old age bracket. The strategy has a mantra. So for most people that don't know what a mantra is, it's guiding principles, which is actually making us more accountable to not only the youth, but also us as councillors, but more importantly to the broader community to actually be accountable to this strategy. So it's not going to be something we're just going to do because we think it's a nice thing to do. We're actually going to be accountable. The strategy also provides an opportunities list. It has an advocacy agenda, which is not dissimilar to the advocacy efforts that we put out in normally as councillors. Some of the areas is access to services, improved public transport, and improved mobile and internet service. So now we've actually got the proof that it's a whole of community that are having these issues. It's not just a proportion. The action plan, as Director Ray had alluded to, is for the next 12 months. So we've actually got some real tangible actions to get in and get our hands onto. So that's really good that we've actually got some idea of what we're meant to be doing. And the best thing about that is that we're going to connect more with our youth council. There's an accountability for us as councillors to actually rely upon our youth council more and obviously engage and listen to the youth in our shire more as well. So I think, as I said, we've got guiding principles to make us accountable to do that. This document can't just sit on the shelf. It's far too important. There's been way too much work put into it. I would like to thank everyone who was involved in getting this strategy to the council table, especially the fellow councillors for supporting this project. As I said, it's the first time we've ever done anything like this. I also want to thank the staff from the youth department, our youth mayor Tess Lowry, and the fellow youth councillors who put so much work and effort into this, and all the youth right across our shire that participated in the feedback for the project. This document is completely different to any others that we've pulled together, and that is because it's been brought together by the younger people at mind. And it is a great document. I can't highly recommend it for people to get out there and read. So thank you.
Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Beard's covered things very, very comprehensively here. But I do think the youth strategy is an important step forward to create a formal engagement with the Shire youth, to understand their needs and aspirations, and to help guide future planning by recognising and considering the perspective of our young community and working with them. It identifies issues and opportunities that are relevant to the age range recommended in the document and provides guiding principles necessary for useful engagement. The plan has been developed with contribution from a broad range of stakeholders, professionals and community members, and has used the co-design process, which is a new approach to inform the design of the strategy that enables an increased level of participation by youth. It links with Council's vision for a connected and thriving community and values our young people who are central to the evolving community and the future leaders that we plan for. I support the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Kennedy. Councillors, any further comment? Yeah, I'd just like to add, I'd like to commend Katie Hearn and her team and the Youth Council for the huge amount of work that's gone into this, and thank all the people who participated, especially the young people. But this was done on a pretty broad base, and there was a lot of canvassing going on to get opinion. Some of the concerning issues that stand out in the report is the feeling of isolation many of our young people experience. And what was very concerning to me was that 36% of those surveyed listed mental health support as being deficient within the area. And there were 16% that wished to feel safer at home. And a very large percentage could be grouped on wider issues related to isolation. We live in a rural community, but that should not mean that our young people should feel disconnected and isolated. You know, some of the contributing factors of that are public transport, connectivity, lack of activities. There are many issues that were listed here that will require resourcing, and that's something that the incoming council will need to consider. It is vital that this report becomes a working document, and I'm sure it will be. So without any further ado, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. We'll move on to item 9.5, quick response grants. Mr. Neeson, thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to present this report for the allocation of funds through the Quick Response Grants program for August 2020. The Quick Response Grants program is beneficial in supporting instances when the community are unable to submit applications through annual grant programs. The application recommended for funding in this month's allocation is in accordance with the policy and will result in positive outcomes for the community. A recommendation has been brought before you.
Thanks, Mr. Neeson. Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Brown, do I have a seconder? Councillor Gastrain. Councillor Brown? You're on mute, Councillor Brown. No, still on mute.
Thank you. Right now, thank you. Apologies for that. Through you, Mr. Mayor. E-waste and battery recycling is one of our modern world issues, and even though there are regular campaigns with promotional material distributed on how to recycle these materials, not everyone is aware of what to do. This hands-on promotion with pick-up and disposal project gives residents the opportunity to get rid of these items and to learn about the recycling. I'd like to thank the committee for accepting the deferral of their application at our last council meeting. For me, it was a much clearer application this time, and I congratulate this group on the project and support their recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Councillor Gastrain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm more than happy to support Councillor Brown. I think this is a well worth project up in Darrenallum, so well done to the Western Plains Working Together Incorporated group.
Thanks, Councillor Gastrain. Councillors, any further comment? Yeah, I'd just like to add that I think this battery project's a great project. I know I've got a container full of used batteries at home that I keep intending to take to the transfer station for recycling, and I keep forgetting it. Maybe now I'll be more active. Any project that really highlights the recycling of batteries gets my tick of approval. We do not want them going into landfill. I can recall Christmas Day a couple of years ago where I think we had 9 units on site at the landfill, and the cause of that was damaged batteries spontaneously combusting. So we don't want them going into the landfill and where they leave a legacy of toxic legacy. So I think this is a great move, so I'm supportive of it. We'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.6. We have a conflict of interest here with Councillor Gastrain.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a conflict of interest. I will, but I'd just like to explain that the proposed sewage line will go past my residential property, and there's a potential that I may benefit from this decision. So I'd like to stand out. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Gastrain. Councillor Gastrain has been moved into the lobby. All right. Ms. Love, can you... Do the report, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. This report, councillors, seeks approval to award contract 2021-008 construction of the sewer line from 220 Park Road, Campbell.
Ms Love, your voice is very muted. Is everyone getting clear?
Sorry, Councillor Trotter.
That's better.
Great, I just brought the microphone in. Councillors, this report seeks to award the contract for the construction of the sewer line from 220 Park Road, CAMPERDOWN. Provide toilet and laundry.
We're losing you again, I think. Seem to be dropping in and out.
Could I ask if the CEO could do this report for me, please, given my volume isn't working? Sorry.
Okay.
Noting that I have a conflict of interest, I'll just give a quick update. So this is a project that is included in council's budget. A tender process has been gone through, and there's a recommendation that that Otway Civil be awarded the contract. The amount is within the budget, and there's been some work, significant work with the assessment of the contract to ensure that the tenderer is able to deliver this project. So the recommendation is before council.
Thanks, Mr Mason. Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Durant, do I have a seconder? Councillor Beard. Councillor Durant.
Thank you, Mayor. This has been a very thorough tender evaluation process, with tenderers being given every opportunity to provide the required information that allows for a fair process and a fair decision. The recommended tender from Otway Civil is the only one within council's budget, and it also meets all other tender specifications. So I'm very happy to move the motion that they be awarded the contract. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Durant. Councillor Beard.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mr Mayor, I certainly agree with Councillor Durant in that the tenderer is going certainly to within budget, so that's a really good outcome. The project, more importantly, is something that was obviously budgeted through council, and it's one that we've talked about for a long time. It's going to be servicing not only the caravan park up there, but more importantly, the visitors that also use that facility whilst they're visiting the Arboretum and the gardens up the Botanic Gardens. So it's a really broad project that is going to benefit a lot of people. So it's certainly something that we've been looking at for a long, long time. And it's great to see that it's finally going to get delivered, and it will be within budget is even better. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Beard. Councillors, any further comment? Yeah, I'd just like to add that, it's a project that's going to protect environmentally valued assets. This area sits above two crater lakes that are very special to the community, and will help prevent nutrient runoff into the lakes. It's just fitting that the sewage scheme is being extended, and I'm happy to support the motion as well. We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous vote. Thank you. Can we bring Councillor Restrain in from the cold? We'll move on to item 9.7, the Port Campbell Township Revitalisation Design Development Report. Mr Neeson, thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to present this report on the adoption of the Port Campbell Township Revitalisation Design Development Report. This project aims to deliver a world-class tourism product while ensuring the Port Campbell streetscape has improved functionality and better meets the needs of locals, especially in peak tourist times. The project seeks to reposition Port Campbell at the heart of the shipwreck coast while still meeting the needs of the local community, and a recommendation has been brought before you for your consideration.
Thanks, Mr Neeson. Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Councillor Illingworth, do we have a seconder? Councillor Restrain. Councillor Illingworth, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. what we've got here is around a $16 million project, an enormous project for Corangamite Shire. What I would like to do, rather than go through it lock, stock and barrel, I just want to mention a number of things that the local community put to us and that have altered or been added. It's by no means a full list, but there's alfresco dining on the foreshore, which was asked for by some of the restaurants. There's the use of timber and the better use of the foreshore pines, so underneath there to get out of the sun and also to view the ocean. The Fishers and Surfers car park has remained the same, which was what was requested. There's also a Fishers and Surfer lookout car park up the top, which is retained and indeed upgraded. It will not be sealed, and the idea behind that is to keep it relatively local, so it's fairly concealed. The streetscape will be pedestrian friendly and much safer for people to move around. The 90-degree car parking on the foreshore has been retained as per the petition that we received. And I thank the people that actually did that and put that together. It made my job a lot easier. We have a wider main road than was first put that will cater for the professional fishermen. The foreshore road will remain open and remain two-way. We listen to that as it relieves the congestion in the main road. The streetscape itself ties with the Tim Boone and 12 Apostles walk access and trail from the 12 Apostles, Tim Boone and the walk bridge. I guess the whole vibe of this streetscape is really altering the way that Port Campbell does business. So ultimately, you know, the bus loads of tourists that we have been seeing in the past, whilst they're absolutely catered for, you know, that lobby-in, buy a widget and go sort of scenario that we've been seeing over the last decade or so is with this streetscape will slow down. So the pace of tourism will slow down, and Port Campbell will cater for a higher yield and lower numbers. So people will be staying in Port Campbell and buying not only a widget as they have been, but they'll be buying accommodation, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And so Port Campbell, indeed, at this point in time, in the short and medium term, it's fair to say that most of the people that will be coming will be holiday makers that are domestic tourists and potentially New Zealand, but it's highly unlikely to have a great deal of international tourists. This design puts Port Campbell as a booming food and beverage town. The design itself is extremely high quality. It is a high expense, so 16 million is not small beer. This is without a doubt the greatest investment Port Campbell's ever had. We have a well-renowned artist that will provide some ideas and work with us, and that will her role will be to put a spotlight on Port Campbell, that raw and harsh environment that we have, the flora and fauna, and I dare say we'll touch upon the courage that has been Port Campbell is well known for, really from the, you know, since Indigenous people were hunting there right through to the shipwrecks, and indeed in recent years with the surf club heroes. It's really time, and I've heard time and time again from the locals saying, you know, while it's quiet, please get this thing done. And it's now, I'm happy to say, it's a time that we hand this to the experts to finish it off. It's also time for the state and federal governments to listen to us, to actually, and listen in particular to the people that own businesses down there that are screaming, saying, get this done, please, now while we're in downtime, while no one's here. The worst case scenario obviously would be that business starts getting back in order, and then we do a streetscape and they get set back probably a third or fourth time. So one thing, and I'm no sort of financial guru, so please take this with a grain of salt, but one thing I would say is that when you've got a $16 million streetscape about to occur, one of the things I would say to locals that if you're looking to buy land or a house in Port Campbell itself, I would seriously consider doing that before this happens, so that you manage to grab your patch of land, because I dare say when you've got $16 million worth of streetscape, things start rising. I'm absolutely chuffed to put this motion. I'm also, I have to admit, quite relieved. It's been a difficult process for everyone. I'd like to thank the locals, and I'd like to thank all the locals for their input. It's been really good, and I'd also like to say special thanks to the committee.
Thanks, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Gistrane.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. And as Councillor Illingworth has said, this is the largest infrastructure project I think that Corangamite Shire has ever put up, and it's certainly come with as an enormous decision to make as a council to commit to a $15.6 million streetscape. But it has been an ongoing process. We've gone through it with the community, and I would also like to thank the Port Campbell community who have certainly put their minds and their thoughts to what their town can look like. I'm pleased to say that I think we have listened, and as Councillor Illingworth outlined a number of community concerns and what the outcome has been. I think it's important that parking always seems to be the number one issue down at Port Campbell when anything is mooted, and it's good to see that the numbers of car parks are actually going to increase by this. This streetscape has been inspired by the history of the Shipwreck Coast and has been designed to maximise the ocean views. And as mentioned earlier, I think we're very fortunate to have the involvement of Dr. Vicky Cousins, a Kirre Warong woman who's going to help us with developing the integrated artwork. This should certainly bring something very significant and something unique to the streetscape, which I think perhaps will, well, I have no doubt, it will certainly encourage people to visit Port Campbell. I can't think of a better stimulus package or a confidence booster for our small businesses to have the state and federal government come on board. There couldn't be a better time, as Councillor Illingworth said, while things are very quiet in this very severely impacted area of the Shipwreck Coast. Council's already set aside $5 million as their contribution, and we would love to see state government and the federal government matching that $5 million, or perhaps putting in a little bit more. We certainly won't argue, but we need to make this happen because Port Campbell streetscape has been in need of an overhaul for several years, and it needs to be made safer for the hundreds of thousands, millions of visitors it gets each year, as well as importantly the locals that use it daily. So I certainly urge state, federal government to come on board, and can also thank the communities of Port Campbell and district, thank other councillors because well, the vote hasn't been taken yet. I'm hoping it goes through, that the work that they've done over the last few years on this project. So more than happy to second the motion, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gistrane. Councillors, any further comment? I'm really chuffed to see this coming before council. It's got my full support. As a former resident of Port Campbell, a long-time resident, I've seen many transitions over the years, and I can remember when the Great Ocean Road was put through from Apollo Bay over the top of the hills. So I've been around for a while and involved in tourism down there, and this is probably the biggest step forward I've seen in all that time, and it's going to be a huge project for Port Campbell and for the entire Shire and the coast, and it's well needed. Port Campbell's starting to look a bit tired, and I think this is a great project and it has my full support. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.8, the finance report. Mr. David Ray, thank you.
Mayor, thank you, and through you. Councillors, this report proposes that you note the provisional financial result for the 19-20 financial year, the financial position as at the 30th of June of 2020, and to also approve the changes to the current year or 2021 adopted budget or carried forward items that have not yet been completed from the 19-20 financial year. Council's 19-20 provisional result against the forecast that's been adjusted for the carry forwards is a favourable variance to budget of $1.2 million. The variance mostly reflects savings in net recurrent expenditure. $9.5 million in carried forward adjustments are proposed. $4.8 million of that represent income received in advance prior to the 30th of June this year. The remainder represents funding for projects committed or had commenced in the 19-20 financial year. The impact of the carry forwards on the 2020 budget has been detailed in the report. And it's forecast as a result of those carry forwards, there will be a deficit of $12.2 million for the 2021 financial year, with a projected cash position at 30 June 2021 of $9.7 million. The deficit position is offset by the favourable cash position at the end of June of the 2019-2020 financial year. Importantly, Council's financial position remains strong. It's also important to note the results presented remain subject to audit, and the Council's Audit and Risk Committee will consider the financial statements in September, and Council will also then be requested to give in-principle approval to those statements following that committee meeting. Mayor, the recommendation is before you.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Councillors, we have the recommendation. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Gastrane, seconded Councillor Durant. Councillor Gastrane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to move the recommendation, but I do have a question for Mr. Ray or perhaps Ms. Love, just with regards to the projects that are still outstanding, both capital and operational, if they've got a comment to make. I'm just having a look at the sheet. There seems to be quite, I think all projects are underway, but there seems to be a number that are not yet completed, and I'm wondering what the reason is.
Councillor Gastrane. Councillor Mr. Ray or Ms. Love, who wants to take the question?
Mayor, just through you, if I could just add that subject to the carry forwards and in comparison to the result of budget, the budget result for the last financial year is generally neutral. In fact, there's a very minor variance to budget. The projects proposed to be carried forward generally relate to those projects that have experienced some delays associated with COVID-19, delays associated with weather, and delays associated with grant applications and approval processes. Mayor, Director Love may have something further to add, or Mr. Mason.
Thanks. Ms. Love, do you have anything further to add?
I don't think that Ms. Love can talk. Ms. Love can't talk. Her microphone's not working, Mr. Mayor. So.
All right. Thank you. Did you have anything further to add, Mr. Mason?
No, I think that David, management have obviously done a thorough review of all carry forward projects. We think there's good reasons for all of those projects that need to be carried forward. And while it will add to an existing delivery program this year, there's no reason not to recommend those carry forwards go forward. I think that noting that some of those are really, there's some large sums of money attached to some of those because of late grant applications and so forth. So management is comfortable with those carry forwards.
Thanks, Mr. Mason. Councillor Gastrane, you're happy with? You're on mute. Yeah, still on mute, Councillor Gastrane.
Sorry. No, I'm quite happy with the response from Mr. Ray and Mr. Mason, and I'm happy to move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Gastrane. Councillor Durant, you're the seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We finished the year in a better financial position than forecast, and given the challenges and constraints that coronavirus has thrown up over the last few months, I think this is a great result. Our working capital ratio at 514% is much higher than anticipated and well above the recommended threshold of 100% or above. So I'm sure we'll be leaving the new council in a very sound financial position. Thank you.
Councillor Durant. Councillors, any further comment? Councillor Beard.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's just worth noting that this year has not been normal by no means, and I think the organisation has done well to still try and deliver business as usual on top of the money coming in and out and the changing of it all and the reporting of it all. Nothing is normal, but it's still good to know that we're on track to actually complete the projects that were initially, as I said, business as usual, as well as all the extra work that is has come our way due to the COVID stimulus as well. So the organisation is tracking incredibly well. At the end of the day, it's really hard to read, as I said, everything come with all the ins and outs and the financial statements, but we do trust and really acknowledge the hard work that gets put into these reports, and to note that at the end of the day, how we're tracking and that we're in a really good, solid, and as Councillor Durant, a responsible position that we're leaving the next council with. So I think it's a credit to everyone involved, and more importantly, the staff that are continuing to get these jobs done.
Councillor Beard. Councillors, any further comment? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.10, council to council staff delegation. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, there's item 9.9 as well.
Oh, sorry, I've missed that one. 9.9, local government performance indicators report for the 12-month period ending 30th of June 2020. Mr. Ray, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Mayor, the purpose of this report is to provide council with the provisional results of the legislative performance indicators for the 12-month period ending 30 June 2020. Council's performance for the period is generally positive with respect to the service performance indicators, and is also consistent mostly with prior year. Results are favourable amongst the financial performance and sustainability indicators as well. Council continues to meet its governance obligations as reflected in the governance and management checklist. Some of the indicators presented this evening will form part of the performance statement, which will be included in the annual report for the 1920 financial year. The performance statement is also subject to audit and will be considered by Council's Audit and Risk Committee prior to Council giving in-principle approval late September. Mayor, it's recommended Council note the 12-month provisional results for the 1920 year for the legislative performance indicators.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Durant, do we have a seconder? Councillor Australian. Councillor Durant.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I can't miss a last opportunity to make a comment on the performance indicators report. Thank you. As I've said many times before, this data is useful as an internal document to look at trends and see whether we're making progress, but I don't think it's particularly valuable if it's used as a benchmark document against other councils. Also, some of the reporting requirements vary from year to year, so care needs to be taken in the interpretation of the figures. Just a couple of highlights for me. Trends in the planning area continue to show a decrease in the time taken to decide on a planning application, and a 29-day average is below the lowest suggested limit, which is a credit to our planning staff. The percentage of council meetings closed to the public has dropped from 12.6% in the 16-17 financial year to just 3.9%, and is one of the positive indicators of transparent decision making and very relevant to the transparency policy that we adopted tonight. So I'm also make mention that this report costs council $10,000 every year. It's a mandatory process that we have to go through. It takes up a lot of officer time, and I do question whether we get value for that money, but we have no choice. So thank you. I'm happy to move the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Durant. Councillor Australian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm like Councillor Durant. I can see some positives and quite a lot of negatives with this report. On the positive side, I think our performance is very good and is very stable, and it certainly does highlight some areas that we excel in and other areas that we can perhaps improve on. And just one statistic I'd just like to mention, and it's around the usage of libraries. And our libraries have certainly been impacted, right across the Shire, have been impacted by COVID-19 and have been closed. There's been limited service offered. So in the figures, the library usage has decreased by around 15%. But in saying that, library membership has gone up substantially since COVID-19. A lot of people are taking the opportunity to borrow through Borrow Box, which is a free ebook that you can download. So I'll get a plug in there for the libraries. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Australian. Councillors, any further comment? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.10, Council to Staff Delegation. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and again, another report that's required because of the changes to the Local Government Act. This is largely a procedural matter in that some pieces of legislation other than the Local Government Act require council to delegate directly to council staff. And these delegations are necessary so council staff can carry out day-to-day functions on behalf of council. The recommendation is that council adopt a new instrument of delegation. The instruments of delegation are prepared through Maddocks and so have been signed off legally. So the recommendation is before you, councillors.
Thanks, Mr. Mason. Councillors, we have the recommendation. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Kennedy, seconded Councillor Australian. Councillor Kennedy. Still on mute, Councillor. Councillor Kennedy is having trouble getting off mute. Have we got someone that can assist?
Mr. Welsh, are you able to assist?
Mr. Neeson's gone.
Right, we'll just have to hold until we can fix this technical glitch.
So she's off mute now.
Right, thank you.
Just a temperamental iPad. Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you. Yes, a procedural matter. So this instrument is required to review and bring council's. Sorry, I've got myself mixed up. I beg your pardon. So this review is required to bring council's instrument of delegation to council staff in line with changes in the Local Government Act and other legislation. It's a vital instrument to support the daily operations of council, and all the necessary consultations have occurred and advice received. So I support the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Kennedy. Now, who seconded that? Can I, Councillor Australian. Councillor Australian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, this is just a procedural issue, and it's been reviewed by council staff and reviewed importantly by Maddocks, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with their opinion. So happy to second.
Thanks, Councillor Australian. Councillors, any further comment? We'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll go on to item 9.11, record of Assembly of Councillors. Mr. Mason, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. 2 records of assembly to be accepted at tonight's meeting.
Councillors, the recommendation is before you. Can we have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Baird. Councillor Brown? You're still on mute, Councillor Brown.
Right now.
You're right now.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, procedural and it's all correct. Thank you.
Councillor Beard.
Sorry, Mayor Trotter, I'll actually forego that. Councillor Illingworth actually had his hand up prior to mine. So I'll pass on to him if that's okay, thanks.
Right, Councillor Illingworth.
It's all good, thank you.
Councillors, any further discussion? Take a vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillors, do we have any other business? Councillor Beard.
Yeah, Councillor Trotter, I just wanted to make mention, we might have some listeners joining us tonight, and goodness help them all because we've fumbled our way through tonight. So thank you everyone that stayed online listening to us. But the Great South Coast Leadership Group, some of their members or participants are actually watching us online tonight. So I just wanted to acknowledge them, and hopefully they've learned something from us tonight, possibly of what not to do. But certainly just wanted to have a shout out to them if we can, please.
Thanks, Councillor Beard. We'll move on to item 11, open forum. Mr. Mason, do we have any open forum?
No, we've had no request for open forum tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Well, we'll terminate the recording of the meeting at this point. We'll move into confidential items. I'll ask for a councillor to move the recommendation that we move into confidential items. Councillor Beard, second to Councillor Illingworth. Any discussion? All those in favour? Carried.